where we're going to talk about, we know that there's a huge amount of anxiety associated with injuries, including concussions. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michele Kerulis, who's a clinical psychologist who works closely with us at U.S. Soccer and so many other aspects of sport. Dr. Michele Kerulis, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. George. Appreciate it. Hi, everybody. First thing I would like to do is have you all take out your cell phones and scan this QR code that you see on your screen. This will lead you directly to a Padlet, which is an interactive website. Everything that I'm talking about today will be linked on that Padlet. So 3 things I really want you to think about. When you walk away, I hope you have a better understanding of mental health, a better understanding of mental toughness, and how to put those 2 things together. So a lot of people wonder, what is mental health and why do we need to learn about mental health? Well, we know that we're seeing so many more public conversations around the topics of mental health, so it's important for us to be able to understand some basic concepts related to mental health topics. Another thing is that all of us experience difficulties in life. Nobody has it perfectly as much as people try to curate their social media to show that. We all have difficulties. And something that's really upsetting is on average, people wait 11 years to seek help for some symptoms. So what we want to do, both individually and collectively, is work together to make a difference and try to demystify some of these issues related to mental health. I really like the definitions from the World Health Organization and American Psychological Association about what is mental health. And if we look at this from a layman's perspective, it's really about the ability to move through our own lives, to recognize emotions, and to really be able to feel those emotions and cope with some difficulties that come our way. People who have well-functioning mental health can face some of those difficulties, identify their roadblocks, work through their ups and downs, and then also be able to talk to other people for help. So we manage difficulties pretty well, but when do we know that it's time to seek a counselor? When do we feel like maybe this is going to be too much for either us to handle, or if we recognize this in our athletes? Counselors are really great at helping people through different developmental perspectives and different developmental stages. This might include something like going through an injury, which we've heard a lot about tonight. There's a lot of psychological recovery with injury, transitioning from one level to the next, transitioning out of sports, relationships, family issues. So all those kinds of things counselors can help you with. And clinical mental health is the actual diagnosis, treatment, and assessment of DSM-diagnosed conditions. So this is performed by a licensed mental health professional like myself. So I'm a licensed counselor with a specialization in the field of sport and exercise psychology. So when you're working with your athletes and you feel like there needs to be a referral to a mental health professional, try to find a counselor, a psychologist, a social worker, marriage and family therapist, psychiatrist, who have specialty working specifically with athletes. And this is really important to remember when we look at the numbers. There are some really tough numbers to swallow. We know that over 50% of adults in their lifetime will experience a mental health crisis or mental health diagnosis. This also includes 1 in 5 children. So keep a really close eye on our kids as they're in our care so we can recognize some signs and symptoms. We know that in any given year, adults will face mental health challenges too. That's typically 1 in 5 adults. And this brings us to looking at the suicide rate in our country. And in 2020 alone, we had 46,000 people who took their lives. 12.2 million people thought about it. 3.2 million people planned their own deaths. 1.2 million people made attempts. So that is a huge amount of individuals who are hurting so badly and felt alone. Well, I want you to know that you are not alone. Your athletes are not alone. 1 month ago, almost to the date, we launched 988, which is the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This is a 24-hour line that's staffed by the suicide prevention lifeline. So the 1-800 number is still active, but the 988 number can work via phone call, text, and the crisis text line actually is available for text messaging. So please share these resources with other people. You never know who is going to need it or who might be impacted by simply talking about this. You might understand then, what can we do with all of these resources? What can we do about mental health? Number one, just remember that emotions are not good or bad. They're just clues about how we perceive certain situations and how we react to certain situations. We want to start having conversations openly, in public and private, about mental health and wellness. And this helps us reduce stigma that's related to mental health topics. So the more we discuss this, the more we're in spaces like this, the easier it is for people to approach their friends, their family, their teammates, coaches, clinicians, other caretakers about their mental health concerns. Now, when we talk about mental health, we also want to talk about mental toughness. We talk about mental toughness in sport. It is talked about almost the most, but the least defined concept that we talk about, especially within our field in athletics and in sports psychology. So of course, in sports psychology, we want to define mental toughness and really look at what it means to individuals. The cool thing about mental toughness is some people just seem to have that natural ability. For other people, it can be developed. And this is really about having the psychological edge over over opponents, but working well with our teammates. And it helps us cope better with our own demands, better than our opponents. It has to do with consistently performing under high pressure and under stress. Now, the thing with mental toughness is that sometimes we think about mental toughness as not expressing emotion, as not dealing with mental health, as being able to manage everything that comes our way. Now, that's actually a myth, because when we're thinking about mental health issues, part of mental toughness is actually the ability to recognize not only our strengths, but our difficulties. And in that, it also has to do with the ask of others to help us when we need that. We spend thousands of hours training our bodies. Let's make a commitment to spend an equal amount of time training our minds and the young minds of the athletes who we encounter. So make time to talk about mental health, to talk about sports psychology, and let's put all of this together. So when thinking about mental health, when thinking about mental toughness, I want you to recognize this quote from Mental Health America. Life can be challenging, but every day should not feel hard or out of your control. When things start feeling out of control, that's when it's time to talk to somebody and call a counselor. We are specially trained to help people. I promise you, we've heard almost everything under the sun. Sometimes people are embarrassed or ashamed to talk about something with us. Everything is on the table because we are extremely dedicated to help people live healthy and well lives. And so when we make mental health a priority, when we put these two concepts of mental health and mental toughness together, we know that we can work together to decrease stigma related to these discussions about mental health, taking time to talk about emotions, and we can do this both on and off the field. We want to normalize talking about difficult emotions. It's really easy to talk about excitement and happiness, but it's not so easy to talk about grief and trauma and crisis. So let's start doing that. When we normalize talking about difficult emotions, we can help explain that mental toughness helps acknowledge both the good and the bad, as I previously mentioned. So dedicate some time to yourself, to your teams, about talking about sports psychology, training our brains, and this can help us demystify areas related to mental health. We had a question at the beginning of the webinar that I'm really sorry that we have to address. The question was about gun violence and gun trauma. So on the Padlet, when I saw that question, I added resources from the American Counseling Association. I'm part of their executive committee, and we have an entire toolbox, unfortunately, but fortunately, as a resource related to how to cope with gun trauma. I also added FBI resources and training related to active shooters. So I know it took a lot of courage to ask that question at the beginning of the seminar. So thank you for that question, because it's actually a pretty common question. George, thank you for spending time on mental health. My information is also on the Padlet.
Dr. Kerulis, first of all, thank you so much. Obviously, mental health, I think most of our clubs, especially with COVID, I think it became a factor and something that a lot of clubs, organizations, coaches started to recognize even more. What their position is as a coach. It's not just about on the field stuff, but I think that they, without question, realized the magnitude of their role, especially for the youth population. One of the biggest questions we have as coaches is time. There's so many things that is put on their plate. We want to be sensitive to coaches' time and kids' time. With what you described, could you share a little bit of how you think mental health can become innate in a coach environment, in a club environment that really resonates in a very brief way, resonates for our youth population, if you're a coach or a club in our game?
Absolutely. That's a really great question. And we think about how we allocate time, especially with youth who have school and homework and multiple trainings a day sometimes, and practice, competitions, travel. So where do we fit everything in? I think we have to make it a part of our training protocol. So just like we talk about nutrition and injury prevention, going to the dentist, we go to the dentist hopefully at least once or twice a year. It's like getting a tune-up and really assessing how people are in terms of baseline. So what is their natural disposition? What do your athletes look like from day to day in terms of their moods? And when coaches see a shift in that, that's a clue that it might be time to call in somebody with sports psychology training just to take an observation and help people. I think tools like the Padlet, I think webinars can be very helpful and impactful, and allowing young people to use technology to learn about mental health can be very good too, because again, some people don't want to talk about it in public, and having these resources allows them to research it on their own. But I think if coaches take the time to dedicate to talk about mental health training, that shows the athletes it's an important topic and they take it more seriously. So whether that is a quick check-in at the beginning, saying, let's check on each other on our mental health, what's one positive thing that we can say to each other today, that's something. And also to say, if you're having a hard time, come up and talk to me, let's work it out.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kerulis. And we left the references up there for everyone. So please take advantage of them. Thank you so much, Michele. And you have a great night. And just for everyone, a reminder on Recognize to Recover, we do have our mental health resources. Please utilize them. And I will let everyone in on something that we are working with Dr. Kerulis and our staff in starting to implement mental health education in our coaching education. So that will be forthcoming in the future. Thanks so much, Michele.
Thank you.